They had been watching us for 107 years, before we knew they existed. That was the briefing I received 3 days out from the Sarin gas cloud, sitting in a converted equipment bay aboard the It's Pale Inference with a cup of cold coffee, and a data packet that should have required a far higher clearance than Warrant Officer, Intelligence Branch, First Deployment. Commander Sothis had handed it to me herself. She'd said, very quietly, that they'd given it to me because I had the right kind of mind for it, and I'd spent the following 8 hours trying to figure out if that was a compliment. The Sorathi Assessor Rate, a civilization built on a single consuming purpose, knowing what everything in the galaxy was precisely and what it was worth, not in any commercial sense. The Assessor Rate didn't trade, didn't colonize, didn't make war in any way we recognized. They catalogued, they classified. They maintained what their own communications called the Register of Observed Intelligences, a running assessment of every spacefaring species within 400 light-years, updated continuously from a network of observation, arrays so precisely engineered they could parse the hull alloy composition of a ship from 2 star systems away without ever being detected. We had been in the register for 107 years. Our entry had not changed meaningfully in 80 of them. Emerging species, biological ceiling, moderate, military potential, low-tier emergent, projected threat horizon, 400 years, conditional on no external interference. Recommended action, continued observation, no contact, low priority reassessment cycle every 40 years. That was what they thought we were. That was what they had thought we were for a very long time. The Pale Inference was not a ship they would have recognized from their records. She was a stealth cruiser, not the heavy kind, not the kind you'd park in a battle line and point at a problem. She was the kind of ship that existed so that we could be exactly where we needed to be without anyone knowing we were there. 600 meters of hull built around an acoustic profile that read, in most sensor environments, as something between a drifting mineral fragment and nothing at all. Her crew of 83 included 11 people like me, analysts, intercept specialists, signals interpreters. We were not there to fight. We were there to listen and to understand what we heard. The mission was simple in outline and not at all simple in reality. We were going to decloak inside the Assessor Rate's primary assessment array in the Sarin system, close enough that every instrument they had would be pointed directly at us before we gave them time to recalibrate. Not close enough to threaten, close enough to be read. Commander Sothis had put it this way in the final briefing. We were not going to tell the Assessor Rate what we were. We were going to let them discover it for themselves, and then we were going to listen to what happened when they did. I had never understood, until that moment, how much of a difference there is between those two things. We dropped stealth at 3:17, ship time, at a distance of 11,000 kilometers from Array Station Sarin Primary. I was at my station in the intercept bay, headset on, 3 screens running, watching the Assessor Rate's outbound data traffic in real time. I had spent 6 weeks aboard the Pale Inference learning to read their encoding well enough to track the shape of a transmission, even if I couldn't always parse its full content. The traffic patterns had a rhythm to them: query pulses, return acknowledgments, routine calibration pings between the array nodes, the low background hum of a system that had been doing the same thing without interruption for longer than I'd been alive. For approximately 4 seconds after we dropped stealth, nothing changed. Then Array Station Sarin Primary sent a priority burst to its nearest relay node that was, by my rough translation, the equivalent of a diagnostic error report. The station's instruments had returned a contact. The contact was not in any of its expected classifications. The station was requesting secondary confirmation. Secondary confirmation came back 9 seconds later. It agreed with the primary reading. The contact was real. The contact was a vessel. The vessel's hull configuration did not match any entry in the register. I logged the timestamp and started writing. Over the next 40 minutes, I watched the assessor rate's assessment infrastructure attempt to process what it was seeing and fail and attempt again. The pale inference was the wrong shape. She was longer and more slender than anything in our register entry, built along lines that their models associated with species 2 full tiers above us on their capability index. Her hull materials were wrong. The alloy signatures that their instruments had grown accustomed to reading from our older ships were not present. Her drive signature was wrong. Her reactor output was wrong by an order that their instruments initially flagged as a sensor malfunction, rather than an accurate reading, because accurate readings that far outside a projected development curve simply didn't occur in their experience. And the crew, they had 83 confirmed biosignatures. They had been tracking human crew complement ratios for a century. They knew what a ship this size should carry. 83 wasn't it? 83 was a ship twice this size. The per station efficiency ratio they were calculating was outside the upper boundary of anything in the register for any species at any tier. The traffic between the array station and its relay nodes went from routine calibration, hum, to something I can only describe as the electronic equivalent of raised voices. Not panic. The assessor rate didn't panic as far as I could tell. They didn't have the cognitive architecture for it. But there is a state that a system built on certainty enters when certainty fails it, and I was watching that state propagate outward in real time, node by node, relay by relay, back toward whatever passed for their central analysis infrastructure. At the 52-minute mark, the first fracture appeared. One assessment node sent a formal reclassification request upward, a recommendation to suspend the current register entry for Terran pattern species and open a priority reassessment. The language was clipped and technical, but the meaning was clear. What we are seeing does not match what we expected to see, and the correct response is to update the model. 11 minutes later, a second node senior, by the traffic weight it carried, responded with a data integrity challenge. The instruments were malfunctioning. The readings were outside calibrated parameters. The correct response was maintenance review, not reclassification. The first node replied. I spent 20 minutes parsing that exchange very carefully, and what it amounted to, stripped of all their formalized assessment language, was this: the instruments are not malfunctioning. The data is accurate. The model is wrong. The second node did not respond. A third node, which had been silent for the entire contact window, entered the exchange with a single transmission. I translated it 3 times because I wanted to be sure I had it right. It said, approximately, the contact profile has been logged. Analysis suspended pending senior review. No further communication on this channel until review is complete. Then it went quiet. We held position for another 90 minutes, broadcasting nothing, doing nothing, simply being there. A fact that their instruments could read and their models couldn't contain. At 6:51, Commander Sothis gave the order to withdraw. We brought stealth back up in a slow, deliberate sequence. No burst, no sudden disappearance, just a gradual reduction in our signal profile that would be as legible to their instruments as everything else had been. I don't know what a Sorathi analyst looks like. I don't know how they process information biologically, or whether what I'd call frustration maps onto anything in their cognitive experience. I know their civilization had been built on the premise that the galaxy was knowable, classifiable, reducible to tiers and threat horizons and 40-year reassessment cycles. I know they had spent 107 years fitting us neatly into a register entry that told them, in precise and carefully maintained detail, exactly what we were, and exactly how long we had left before we became worth paying attention to. I know that by the time we withdrew, the 3 nodes in their primary assessment array were no longer communicating with each other. I filed my intercept report that evening. Commander Sothis read it, made 2 small corrections to my transliteration of the 3rd node's final transmission, and then looked at me for a long moment before she said, "They spent a century learning what we had been. They built very good models. They did everything right." She handed the report back. "The problem," she said, "is that they were modeling a species that had decided to become something else, and they didn't have a category for that." I thought about that for a long time on the transit home. The assessor rate's register was accurate. Every reading they had taken for 107 years had been faithfully recorded and correctly interpreted. The data was not wrong. The data was a perfect record of everything we had shown them. What the data didn't contain was the part we had kept to ourselves. The part that isn't visible from the outside until the moment it is, and by then the models are already broken.